Mercedes has just introduced the EQE AMG version, and I'm not so sure Mercedes designers are having a lot of fun at the moment in their design studios, because to me it looks exactly like a shrunken EQS. And we're gonna compare the two in both the front, side and rear. And I'm gonna need your help because we have this game in Sweden, I'm sure you have it here as well, called Find 5 Faults, when you have two very similar pictures next to each other and your task is to find 5 different things that differentiates the two pictures. And we're gonna do the exact same thing here with the Mercedes EQE. But before we do that, let's talk about some of the spec and tech, because that's where the cool stuff really is with the AMG EQE. So Mercedes introduced the all-new EQE a few months ago, and now it's time to show off the AMG version right here of the electric E-Class with the EQE 43 and the 53 as well. The less powerful EQE 43 though will be offered in Europe, but not in the US. Now it's obviously a smaller package than the top of the line AMG EQS, but it still aims to match the performance of its bigger sibling. So what's interesting is that the AMG EQE uses the same 90.6 kilowatt-hour battery that you find in the standard EQE, which most likely means that the range will be reduced compared to the regular EQE. You have more power, but it's still the same kind of battery, so range is probably going to go down here. It's got 2 electric motors for a total power output of 617 horsepower and 701 pound-feet of torque. But if we go for the Dynamic Plus package, this goes up to an impressive 677 horsepower and 738 pound-feet of torque, which is a beast of a machine. 0 to 60 takes about 3.4 seconds in the standard car and 3.2 seconds with the Dynamic Plus package, with a limited top speed of 149 miles per hour. Now, I'd love to see how fast the battery drains when you're doing those kind of speeds on the Autobahn, for example. The 2 motors are AMG exclusive with a rear bias power distribution. And this means that Mercedes says that the AMG EQE will be able to do some sweet drifting if the driver wants to have some extra fun. The AMG EQE comes with a standard air suspension tuned to be a little stiffer than the suspension in the standard EQE, and this is normal. If you have an AMG package, you want to have it be more sporty. You can add carbon ceramic brakes, which might be a good idea to confidently stop this massive machine, since it weighs a full 2.5 tons. Now here's a detail that I love about this AMG version of the EQE. It comes with a staggered wheel setup with beefier tires in the rear, and this gives it a very important sporty and more planted stance than, for example, the EQS, which is fitted with identical tire sizes both front and rear. Some of the competitors for the AMG EQE are the Tesla Model 3 Performance, the Tesla Model S as well, and the BMW i4 M50. The AMG EQE is still a ways out before it reaches the US dealers. It's expected to go on sale in early 2023, so about a year from now. So here we have, on top we have the smaller end or motor or powerful version, the 43 up here, and then we have the 53 down here. So let's have a look at these two and see if we can, first of all, before we compare it to the EQS, I want to see if we can see some differences here in the design of these two. Right off the bat, I have a very hard time seeing how you can differentiate the 53 from the 43 here. The only obvious thing here is, of course, the wheel design, but I think these are actually packages that you can choose. You can probably have these wheels on the 53 and vice versa. You can have these wheels on the 43 right here if you want to. And one thing I've said before that I think Mercedes is currently doing a totally fantastic job in designing are wheel design from factory. I think Mercedes is probably the best company right now for designing in-house wheels. I think both of these are very cool looking wheels. I would have some problems deciding which ones I would go with. I would probably go with these ones right here, because I think these are more unique than these ones right here. These kind of remind me a little bit of the M2 competition wheels, which is not a bad thing. But if we zoom in here, you can see that you have this rim going inside behind the spokes, and that creates a very cool visual effect when these are rolling. You can see that on the new Mercedes E-Class as well, have similar wheels to this, and I think it looks really cool, specifically when the wheel is in motion. So now let's compare the EQE to the EQS. This is what I'm saying when I said in the beginning that I'm not sure the Mercedes designers are having a very fun time at the moment, because there is not a lot of creativity here comparing these two when it comes to how they are different from each other. So I think if I were to see these out on the streets, I personally would have a very hard time separating the two. I think the biggest thing is probably the proportions, which we're going to have a look at in the side view, that really tells if it's an EQS or an EQE. But looking at the graphics here in the front end, you do have a little more styling in, or I mean, with that I mean curvatures in the EQE. For example, this line right here on the EQS that houses the frames, the grille and the headlights, pretty much almost straight here going into this corner, and pretty much straight in the top as well. And then you have the EQE, which has a lot more curvatures to it right here, specifically in this area right here, and then almost horizontal line going up to this same corner. So that's one thing that differentiates the two, and I think that's good, because as I've said before, the larger the model, the more bossy the model, the less styling I want to see in them, and I want to have a more restrained styling when it comes to larger models, which I talked about in the S8 video, for example. Another thing that sets the EQS apart here is, of course, you have this light bar in the middle. So this is something that will definitely set this apart from the EQE. Is at night you're gonna see this big light bar right here in the middle lighting up, and that is something that the EQE doesn't have right here, as you can see. So I think graphically that's probably the biggest change. But if I were to see these in pure daylight from a straight front view, I think how I would differentiate these two is simply by this little black piece right here. So you have this kind of bridge between the graphic in the front and this lower part of the grille, and this I don't want to call it air intake, because as you can see it's not hollow here, but still you have this little bridge here of black trim that you don't have on the EQS. And I think that would probably be the main graphic feature in the front end at daytime if I were to see these two out on the streets and try to figure out if it's an EQS or an EQE. But other than that, they are very, very much alike in the design, and I would kind of wish they were a little more separated when it comes to the design. For example, have a look at the S-Class, the regular one, compare that to the E-Class. It's a lot bigger difference there when it comes to the design, proportions, graphics, and all of it than we have here between the EQE and the EQS. So now let's have a look at the rear view. The rear view is almost, if possible, even more similar than the front end. I'm not sure if Mercedes are using the same headlight or taillights here as you do in the EQS, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 LEDs right here, and we do have a little more LEDs right here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have one more little LED strip additional in the EQS to set these apart. But looking at, for example, the diffuser here is something I want to highlight. You have less styling when it comes to the EQE, a straight line right here, but in the EQS you have a little bit of a dip right here. I'm not sure if you can even see that, but it has a curvature going down here before it goes into the horizontal part, and then of course the same thing on the other side right here. But other than that, the diffuser is almost identical to each other. You have the same styling down here as we have on the EQS right about here, and of course the taillights themselves look pretty much identical here as well. As I said, you have one more additional little LED in the rear end of the EQS compared to the EQE, but you still have a light bar, obviously the trend of the decade, having light bars in the rear end of both of these. I don't really think these are ugly cars, but as I said, I wish they had some more identity. The E-Class had more of its own identity compared to the EQS, and I'm not sure if the EQC is going to be just a smaller version of the EQE here moving forward. And then we have these outlets here, which I'm not a fan of on the EQS. I've talked about this before. I think on the EQS, this is one detail that they easily could have scrapped from the EQS and not have it be sporty, more elegant and clean surfacing. But this is one of these details that I think would probably suit to just keep here on the EQE, because it's a smaller car and it could be a little more sporty and fun than the EQS. Now, last but not least, let's have a look at the side views of these two cars, and this is where you can sort of tell them apart, even though they are still very, very similar in their design. We still have the same line down here As you can see in the base, we have almost a shoulder line going here that continues somewhat in the front end as well. A little bit less pronounced, I would say, in the EQS down here, but they're still there, the same kind of lines. What really sets this apart is the proportions. If you have a look at the EQS, it almost has a preference to the rear passenger when it comes to space. You can see that the door here, this portion of the EQS, is a lot longer than the same portion on the EQE, and that is obviously very natural. If you're going to have an S-Class version of the, an electric version of the S-Class and an electric version of the E-Class, the S-Class needs to have more space in the rear end, and that's exactly what's going on right here. The wheelbase is obviously longer than the EQS as well, but I think the thing that Mercedes is doing here is they want to put out their electric lineup as quickly as possible. So they made this design, and they already proven that this is a very, very efficient design when it comes to wind resistance. This has the lowest wind coefficient of any production car, if I remember correctly. So they don't want to mess that up. Why not take the same shape and just shrink it down to turn it into an EQE, and then shrink it down a little more to turn it into an EQC, and boom, you have yourself a full electric lineup. What this does, though, is that it kind of does create a very strong brand identity, but it doesn't create any fun in the design anymore. They all look the same. They all have this bean looking shape right here, with the A-pillar stretching almost above the front axle right here, both on the EQE and the EQS. But then again, that's what you can do when you have an electric platform, to create maximum cabin space right here. You don't have the need for the space of an engine in the front or a transmission down here. So it gives the occupants a lot more space in the same package as before. Final thoughts here. I think Mercedes is doing a really good job of putting out their electric models, specifically these AMG models. I'm really surprised that they kept the same battery pack as the standard EQE though, because that's going to reduce the range, I guess, I would assume, pretty drastically because of the power output of the AMG models compared to the regular EQE. But I think this is the first iteration of Mercedes EVs, and as they move forward, I think they're gonna come up with more interesting, exciting designs that sets the different classes apart more than we have right here.